Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Ask the Expert session, a follow-up to our digital breakout session where we talked about new innovations on Azure Database for MySQL and PostgreSQL to turbocharge app development. We're here to answer all the questions that you may have about the new flexible server preview that we announced in the digital breakout just earlier on. So before we get started, let me go over a few housekeeping items. First, to engage with the experts like myself or the other folks online, please drop your questions in over chat. Please also feel free to thumbs up any of the questions that you're interested in hearing being answered over the air by some of the experts joined here today. I also want to remind you that the session is going to be recorded, and also to be polite to the experts online as well as other participants in the chat. And I also want to remind you that we are adhering to the Microsoft Code of Conduct here as well. If you joined our digital breakout session, you would have learned about the new flexible server preview that we announced, and we're really excited to answer all the questions that you have today. But before we do that, let me start with a round of introductions. My name is Andrea Lamb, and I'm a senior program manager on the Azure Database for MySQL and MariaDB team. Some fun facts about me: I have gotten really into collecting plants over the pandemic, so I think I'm up to like 30 or 40 plants at this point. Some of my best friends over here as well in the back, and just really excited to be here and answer your questions today. What about you, Arun?
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Arun Tyagarajan. I'm a principal program manager with the Azure Open Source Databases team. I work on migrations, and I've been in the migration space for 7+ years now. On a lighter note, I am super glad I got the chance to go get a haircut to be camera ready for Ignite today. Thank you. Lucas, on to you.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, everybody. Good to meet you, folks. I'm Lucas Fiddle. I'm Senior PM on the Azure Database for Postgres team. Fun fact, I also got a haircut recently, but I did do it myself because, that's how you got to do it these days. I have a lot of background in the open source database space with Postgres. And so what I'm really excited about today is that we're able to bring you some new exciting changes for the Azure Database for Postgres offering in particular, but obviously also there's, important changes to MySQL as well. How about you, Manish?
Thanks, Lucas. And hello, everyone. I'm Manish. I'll be your moderator today. I'm a senior program manager for the Azure MySQL and the MariaDB services. Quick background, was working in the MySQL database space for quite some time before joining Microsoft. And during this COVID time, one thing that I have gained expertise on is cooking. Like many of us who are stuck at home, refining their cooking skills has been one thing that I have spent most of my time over the last several months. Okay, so now I wanted to go through some of the questions that I'm getting from the attendees here and want to get the feedback from the experts out here and help better understand the key announcements that we did around flexible servers. To begin with, Lucas, could you help understand what flexible server is?
For sure, yeah, and that's a good question. So maybe we can go back to the slide that I think, Andrea, you were showing earlier. Yeah, perfect. So I think in order to understand what flexible server is, let me maybe take a step back and describe what deployment options are. So when you create a server in the Azure portal using a CLI or any other API, you essentially choose which deployment option you want to use for Postgres or MySQL. The offerings that you may be familiar with are essentially our single server offerings. So those are the fully managed GA services that run the open source engines. And for Postgres, we actually already had a second deployment option, which is the Hypercale Citus option. And that is, essentially a scale out option for Postgres. Now, today what we're introducing is the new flexible server deployment option. And really, flexible server is a new architecture and a new kind of way of deploying Postgres and MySQL that gives you maximum control with a simplified developer experience.
Thanks, Lucas. That's great to know. Just a follow-up question that I'm getting, Andrea, could you help us explain what's the difference between the already existing single server and how does flexible server comes in that space?
Yeah, so the flexible server preview is a little bit different from single server in the sense that there are a ton of new differentiating features that we've released. And then, like Lucas mentioned in our digital breakout, we've also re-architected our entire service to now run on top of Linux virtual machines. And so let me just swap the slides over really quick. And so what's what's really different about Flexible Server includes these different notions of maximum control, and that includes custom maintenance windows, allowing you to basically schedule when you want your monthly maintenance to occur. You decide the day of the week as well as the hour it's going to roll out. And on top of that, we're also doing VNet integration right out of the box. Another big differentiator there is also the zone redundant HA that's available through Flexible Server, and this allows you to do synchronous replication between availability zones. So that's really great for anybody who has zone resiliency as a top requirement. And then we've also introduced a bunch of different cost optimization features, and one of these includes the burstable compute tier, and the second is also stop start, allowing you to stop your server for up to 7 days and allowing you to save some costs. Maybe you don't need the server to run over the weekend. So there's a bunch of different key features available on Flexible Server only at this point, but single server is really your go-to for existing production workloads while Flexible Server's in preview. And then right now, at the moment, it doesn't support an SLA, but will support an SLA when we move to general availability.
Sure, Andrea. And just a follow-up question that we have from from one of the attendees is compared to managed database on AWS, there is a lack of performance due to network latency. Is there a plan to integrate the flexible servers with VNet? I think you did touch base on that, but could you just expand on that?
Yeah, so for those of you who are already familiar with our single server deployment option, we did have a gateway that sat in front of all of our backend nodes, and that's really the reason why in your connection string we required the @server name syntax. However, in this flexible server deployment option, we actually don't have the gateway anymore. So you don't need to do that additional network hop in order to get to your server. So that should save you in terms of some like network performance or network latency. And on top of that, because with the VNet integration, we actually allow you to basically inject your flexible server right within your virtual network, allowing your applications also hosted within the same VNet to connect directly to your flexible server. So across the board, a bunch of new performance and network-related enhancements.
Thanks for that, Andrea. One question that I'm getting, and Arun, could you help with this? How do customers plan to move their existing workloads to the flexible server?
Thanks, Manish. That's a great question. Andrea, could you pop over to the migration slide, please? Thank you very much. So here at Microsoft, we love open source, and we are on a mission to make migrations to open source databases as predictable as possible. As you can see on the screen here, there are some preparatory steps. It's a multi-step process, and we're offering as many tools as possible to help you navigate through this landscape of migrating a database from your on-premises environments or other cloud providers into Azure open source database platform. So you go in, you discover your existing workloads, you assess and plan your migrations, make sure Azure is a good fit for your workloads, make sure we support all of the features that are needed to meet your mission and vision for the application or the workload you're trying to migrate. And once done, you could use one of the native tools available out there, MySQL dump or PG dump, to go in and dump the schema only out and restore it on the target Azure database. And from a migration standpoint, there are a host of options. Given these are open source databases, you are enabled to use a bunch of native tools available out there, and also some of the community-based tools to enhance your migration experience. And from a migration standpoint, there are two different ways in which you can get your data into Azure open source databases. And depending on use case, one is an offline migration, which is like a point-in-time migration, which requires your front-end application to go down during the period of the migration. And this is pretty easy to do. You could either use the native tools available out there, like dump and restore, MySQL dump and for MySQL, and PG dump, PG restore for Postgres, or you could use the community tools such as MyDumper, which are engineered for fast parallel migrations. You could also use, in case you needed online migration capability and you had a lot of data and you did not have the freedom of taking your workload down during the period of the migration, you could use some of the available native replication options, which is bin log replication or data and replication for Azure MySQL, and also the newly introduced logical replication support in a flexible server, which is available from Postgres 10 plus, where you're just able to, just like bin log replication, you can create a publisher subscriber type replication and perform online migrations with near zero downtime. Now, the last option is if you want repeatability and you want that programmability edge and you want to migrate multiple workloads into Azure, you could also choose to use our Azure Database Migration Service, which helps with online migrations. It uses some of the best practices we talked about from a logical replication perspective, enables near zero downtime migrations, and ensures you see success when you're trying to migrate your workload over to the Azure open source database platform. Once the migration is done, you move on to the post-migration stage where you concentrate on making sure you're successful in the platform. You iterate, you run performance and functional tests to ensure correctness. And once everything looks good, you cut over and start working in the Azure platform and keep a leg in the cloud. Back to you, Manish.
Thanks, Lucas. That's a whole set of functionalities available for our developers to move their workloads. So Lucas, there's a question from one of the attendees is, with flexible servers, do you run multiple Postgres servers within a VM, or it is one VM per server?
Yeah, that's a great question. And maybe for that, Andrea, let's switch over to the architecture slide that we have. So as you can see on this slide, right, so essentially the Postgres and MySQL services, they run inside a virtual machine, and that virtual machine runs just one server. So essentially it's not a multi-tenant model in the sense that, you know, there's multiple database servers per virtual machine, but rather you get your own dedicated virtual machine. And in fact, we actually use the public compute VMs. So when you provision a server, the way that you select which type of server you're running is with the exact same VM types as you can choose, you know, for a regular virtual machine. So it should be very straightforward. It should also make it easy, you know, to understand from a tenancy and kind of, you know, like compartmentalizing your database, separating it from anything else. Is pretty straightforward with the new offering.
Sure, Lucas. And a follow-up question along the same concept. Could you talk a bit about the differentiating feature of zone resiliency that is introduced in the flexible server, Lucas?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think on this slide, we already see, you know, the different availability zones, and then the functionality that we're really introducing today as well is the zone redundant HA functionality. So as you can see here, with the new zone redundant feature, we're essentially, you know, integrating into the Azure availability zones. And so when you deploy a server, that automatically gets deployed into, for example, here's zone 1. And then we also, when you enable the zone redundant HA feature, deploy a second standby server into the availability zone 2. And so you essentially have your full architecture replicated into 2 zones. Now, the benefit of that is when the zone 1 goes down, you can automatically switch over to zone 2 without any data loss. And it utilizes synchronous replication. In fact, in the session just before, we had a question, and for Postgres, for example, that uses the built-in stream replication with Postgres, right? So essentially the standard mechanism that you can do replication in Postgres, and we manage that for you. You don't need to do anything in that regard, right? It just automatically works. It's DNS based, so that means, you know, when there's a failover, the IP address changes, but it's transparent to your application. The connection would just see a reset. And so really the way that you can architect this is that, for example, when you're using AKS or app service, you can also deploy these into zones. And so you could, for example, in AKS in our demo today, we also had a pod, like a Kubernetes pod deployed in each zone. And so you can really build a true resilient app that is able to respond to complete zones going down, both on the application side as well as the database side.
Sure, and just to call out, in case of MySQL, we leverage the bin log replication and manage it for you to achieve the same zone resiliency that is provided for PostgreSQL service. Let me look. So another question that I'm having here, Andrea, is what are some of the pricing options available with the flexible servers? That's more important for our developers who want to build their applications on these flexible servers.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. So let me just switch over to the flexible server documentation for MySQL. I just want to bring up one of our concepts docs that covers the compute and storage options for MySQL. Similar concepts will apply for Postgres. And the way that you pay for your server in flexible server deployment options is using the compute and storage configuration. So based on your compute that you've allocated towards your server, as well as the storage provisioned, that's essentially how you pay for your server. And so as I scroll down on this page, you can see here in the middle of your screen, Lucas talked about this earlier, is we're using the different series of virtual machines available. So we use B series, D series, and E series for each of the compute tiers available. And essentially, when you size your server, you're basically going to be picking the underlying compute size that runs your server. And then we also attach that to additional storage that you can scale up to 16 TB. And so you have the ability to use the scale functionality for both compute and storage. And so you're going to pay per month based on those configurations. And I definitely recommend checking out the pricing pages for both of these services to learn more about the pricing available in each region available for flexible server.
Yeah, and just to add to that, could you talk a bit about how the start-stop functionality would essentially be another catalyst in saving cost?
For sure. So let me just switch over to the Azure portal here, just so you guys know where the stop button is. So this is a flexible server that I already have running. When I click stop, I'm basically given a warning that lets me know that the server is going to be stopped for up to 7 days. And what happens in the 7 days when the server is stopped is we basically stop billing you and we completely stop the compute layer of your particular server. We still have to keep the storage layer up and running because when you eventually restart your server, obviously it's going to need to connect to something and get all your data files. So during this time, you're not billed for compute, allowing you to save costs. So really great for any workloads that don't need to run, say, over the weekend or overnight. Maybe you've got a dev test workload that you only turn on in the morning. Those are the different types of workloads that can really take advantage of the stop-start functionality.
Thanks, Andrea. Lucas, I have a question for you. With the flexible server, what's the operating system that we'll be using to host our managed database offering?
For sure. Yeah, and we actually talked about that earlier, but let me try to do a quick recap of that, right? So underneath the hood, we're using Linux for powering these virtual machines. And for context, you might be surprised, why is Microsoft using Linux here? And as you might know, the open source databases such as MySQL and Postgres, they're usually developed with more Linux in mind. And so with the new offering, we're essentially aligning with what the community is usually focused on. And so it's easier for us to essentially make sure things are compatible. We had some folks, for example, on a Postgres site that ran into issues of collation names previously because on Windows, you have different collation names than on Linux. And so that just makes it a bit easier for you to, use your applications as well. And then I know somebody also asked earlier about, which distribution we're using. And so currently it's an Ubuntu Linux-based setup. We may change that in the future. For Postgres, you can actually check that in the version string. You can see which, OS, which Linux distribution Postgres was built with. And I think you should see Ubuntu there today, but we may be changing that in the future.
Thanks for clarifying that, Lucas. A follow-up question for you, Arun, on the migration side. Where can people go and look up for the best resources and the practices that they can follow for their next migration plan?
Absolutely. Happy to answer that. Thank you, Andrea, for taking me to the data migration guide page. So we have a one-stop shop to help you with all of your database migration needs. And on the screen, you're looking at a series of sources that we support migrations from. We've developed guides and for each of these sources, and we also talk about what targets they can go into. For example, in here, you're looking at everything from SQL Server to MongoDB to Azure Table Storage. And from a migration to open source standpoint, we worked with a number of customers, had a lot of learnings. And from my experience, helping multiple customers migrate their workloads into Azure, it is always important to follow a framework, which is a series of steps that helps you go through a process and helps you understand how to achieve successful migrations. And for us, the framework is the Cloud Adoption Framework, or CAF, which navigates you through 3 important steps that we talked about in my previous reply with respect to migration. And that's exactly what you see on the screen here. So we talked to you about the best practices of how to prepare for a migration, what the prerequisites look like, what tools you would like to use, help you make that decision between an offline versus online migration, the supported versions, the prerequisites that you need to take care of in case you choose one tool over the other, along with additional resources. And then we walk you through how to use these tools along with the best practices for each of those sub-stages I talked about, which is pre-migration, migration, and post-migration. And these are deep level 400, level 500 guides that help you understand what it would take to get your workload into Azure. And you could, if you are tech savvy and you know open source databases very well, you could choose to do this yourself. Or you could also, on the right-hand side of the page, you're looking at some of our preferred partners. You could choose to use our partners who are adept at doing these migrations in terms of moving your data from your on-premises and environments and other places to Azure Cloud. We'd be happy to take more questions. Andrea is going to put up a slide imminently that takes you to a couple of distribution lists, the ask list down in the slide there. And please feel free to reach out to us in case you have questions. We'd be happy to answer them for you. And even if you need an introduction to a partner of your choice that you saw in the page there, we'd be happy to make that introduction as well. And once again, the URL to that page is datamigration.microsoft.com. Pretty easy to remember. Thank you. Back to you, Manish.
Thanks, Arun. I think this is a good resource that the people can follow for their next migration. So I have seen like a lot of developers, especially on the MySQL side, are concerned about parameters. So Andrea, could you help us understand with the new flexible server, what are some of the new additions that we have done with regard to parameters and the capability to tune it?
Yeah, for sure. So we added a bunch of new server parameters for you to take a look at. And so one of the feedbacks that we actually got was, I have performance needs for my particular workload, and I actually want to tune specific server parameters. Some of them weren't actually available on single server and are only available on the flexible server deployment option. Some that we've introduced include the InnoDB log buffer size, temp table size, and I think we also have the query cache limit as well. And so another feedback that we got from some users is, hey, that's great that I can tune some of these parameters, but for the ones that I can't tune, I can't actually tell that I can't tune them, because when I look at the Azure portal, they're either not listed, or I try to query them from the actual MySQL server and I can't change anything because I don't have privileges, for example. So we took that feedback, and one of the things that we've actually done is within the server parameters page here, we actually now are working on displaying both the configurable and non-configurable server parameters. So that way, for you as a user, you can see all the server parameters, even if you can't tune it. So that way, you at least understand what the values are. And then, that kind of helps you with trying to understand some of the performance characteristics of a particular server. So if I scroll down here, you can see some of these are grayed out. The grayed out ones are the non-configurable ones, but at least you can kind of understand what the server actually, the server parameter does and what the value actually is.
Sure. I think that will be a really good tool in the hands of our developers. So, Lucas, in terms of for all our Postgres lovers, how do they make a choice between when to use single server and when to use flexible server?
For sure, yeah, that's a great question, Manish. And so I think this is probably more general, not just for Postgres, but I think overall, right, the important thing to note is that flexible server is in public preview starting today. During public preview, we don't have an SLA. So if you have a production service that you want to deploy into Azure, we do recommend using single server at this point. Once flexible server moves into GA, there will be an SLA, and you can essentially deploy it with the full production requirements you might have. On Postgres specifically, we also brought Postgres 12 to the new flexible server option. And so if you are looking to use Postgres 12 or in the future Postgres 13, which is about to come out, then flexible server will be the correct offering to use for that. There might be other features though, like for example, Azure AD integration that are currently only on a single server. So it's a bit of a, try to understand, what the requirements you have and then make the right choice. I would imagine that, in 6 months time, it should be pretty straightforward, and flexible server is probably, what we recommend for most workloads. But at this point, if you have production workloads, single server might be the right choice.
Thanks, Lucas. I think that certainly clarifies the question. Another migration question, and which has got a lot of traction from the attendees here, is on the Oracle to Postgres migration. Arun, could you help explain what are some of the resources available that people can go and look up to?
Absolutely. Oracle to Postgres migrations are important to us because we are currently helping a lot of customers move their Oracle workloads to Azure Database for Postgres. And there are multiple reasons to do that, from reducing your total cost of ownership to embracing open source, keeping a leg in the cloud, and being able to freely use our other awesome services that are part of the Azure data platform. And given it's a heterogeneous migration, it's a bit more involved, multi-step, and we are on the mission. We have embarked upon the mission to make that as predictable as possible. And the same guide that we talked about has a lot of information on this, on how you're supposed to approach some of these migrations and make them as predictable as possible. It uses the same cloud adoption framework, the pre-migration, migration, and post-migration steps to keep you fully involved with what's going on and keep you fully informed. And from pre-migration point of view, it walks you through setting up our open source Aura to PG tool on an Azure VM, how you go in and plan the migration, how you convert your Oracle objects to Postgres objects, and then go about using either Aura to PG for the offline migration piece or Azure DMS for the online migration piece, and then walks you through how you test for success, how you prepare your teams to ensure they're able to support that particular workload in Postgres. While like I said, it's a hard heterogeneous migration to pull off, following steps and even engaging through some of our expert partners that you see on the screen here has led to a lot of success with respect to moving Oracle workloads to Azure Database for Postgres. And we have multiple customers who have done that transition and run production workloads in Azure Database for Postgres. Back to you, Manish.
Thanks, Arun. I think that this is one of the common pattern that we are seeing on the migration front. So a question that we are seeing here is around the control in deployments. So Andrea, could you help us understand the new custom maintenance windows that we are introducing as a part of the new flexible servers?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to switch back to, let me just pick a Postgres server this time. So this is a Postgres flexible server up and running. And so when I click on the maintenance page here, you get to that from the left navigation. So clicking into the maintenance, essentially you're presented with two different options. The first is system manage schedule. And this is basically going to snap to the specific kind of off-peak business hours that we select for a particular region. So for this one, for example, this would run between 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for that particular region. And so the other option is actually custom schedule, which is only available on flexible server, another differentiating feature we've released here. And so this allows you to actually select the day of the week. And so in this particular dropdown, and also the hour in which you're going to receive that deployment. And I may have mentioned this earlier, but we do ship new updates every month. And so these updates typically include, let's say, a minor version upgrade on the Postgres or MySQL version, may also include new features that we're releasing. So like we mentioned earlier, this is a preview, so we are working actively on supporting more and more features. So you'll definitely see new things light up every month. And then last but not least, we may have, say, like some OS patches or security patches under the hood that we want to push onto you as well. So yeah, so custom maintenance is really great if you need more of a fine-tuned control of when you're going to receive the monthly deployments.
Sure. Thanks, Andrea. We have time for one more question, and that's more on the hybrid space. So, Lucas, a question that we are seeing is for the flexible server on for Postgres, do we support the hybrid replication scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know we're almost out of time, so I'll go quick. So the important thing to know is that today we announced Azure Arc enabled Postgres Hyperscale, and so with Postgres Hyperscale, you can essentially deploy, one of our Azure data services into your own environment. I think that since the question is specifically about replication, we are looking into that. I think today, if you had a single server that's in your own environment, you could actually use logical replication. I think Arun spoke to that earlier on the migration kind of side, and you could also use that, for just regular replication. We are evaluating how we can have a more built-in approach. Today, I would say, you could do it, but it's more manual essentially. But it's certainly something we're actively looking at to support more easily.
Thanks for that, Lucas. I think we are almost on time. So thanks a lot, everyone, for helping with the questions. And thanks, everyone, for attending this session and coming up with these awesome questions for the experts out here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.